it's like a little bit not science, but how the climate change issue is working out, and what is the role of decentralized action plan, especially if you look at SDG goal number 30, that is climate action, that integrate all other SDG goals, all other 17 SDG goals is being integrated, can be connected to climate action. So basically, I will be talking around that aspect. As an introduction, we know that the climate change science is a detection attribution science because we have to, it is an indicator-based science because we have to observe the earth and we have to find out what are the indicators which is making the change. So for that we need a lot of observations. So and then finding out the indicators and we have to attribute how it is changing. And based on that indicator attribute studies, we have to analyze what are the impacts. Based on that impacts, we have to either adapt to that or in the long term we have to mitigate. That is what the climate change assessment cycle is all about. But we have to understand what is happening. In terms of climate change, basically homogeneously what we are observing is the rise in temperature. We know that global average temperature is around 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial period of baseline period of around 1850 to 900. So that is what the present status of global warming, and even 2023 reached it shoot up around anomaly was around 2 degrees in 2023 November. That's what being said that IPCC, even IPCC was envisaging that this should happen maybe after 30 40 years between 2040 and 2050. That happened earlier than that. So that is what things are happening very fast, and then most of the visibility is in terms of changes in hydrological cycles. Because if you look at hydrological cycles, that each component of hydrological cycle is getting accelerated, especially due to global warming, the sea surface warming, the atmospheric warming connected to the increase in evaporation, increase in the rate of condensation, and transport of this bulk of water to the land, and surface runoff is being increased over the years. So that the rainfall or the water is getting running through all these spheres and it is getting accelerated. And then another thing is the sea level rise that is putting a lot of pressure, especially for coastal communities where for that we know that Indonesia recently shifting the capital city from Jakarta to Borneo. So this is how the coastal communities are getting a lot of impact into that, especially the pure indigenous people. And the climate change, the sea level rise along with other extreme sea level conditions, like for example, sea level is rising at a rate of around 3 millimeters per year, but it is projected to rise by around 50 to 100 centimeters, 50 to up to 1 meter. It's global average, but we can see that may witness it may be between around 60 centimeters to 80 centimeters based on different future scenarios. We can see that along with that, a storm is coming. Storms can also put pressure, water pressure, like it can increase the height of the water level to even like 2.5 to 3 meters. Along with that, that together is having some kind of big impact on the coastal cities. So these are some of the visible indicators in the cause of climate change, and its impact is widespread because that you can witness in every aspect. Like globally, weather pattern is getting changed. More drought situations, drought prone areas are getting more flooded, like Middle East regions and European countries. They are getting more frequent extreme rainfall events in the recent times, and also Canada, like European countries, Canada and European countries, they are also frequently facing the heat wave conditions. So that the global weather pattern is getting shifted, and then the water cycle as already due that water quality, quantity, everything is getting deteriorated. Then the air quality is also another problem. And ecosystem level changes. That is what previous two speakers were largely talked about, the ecosystem level changes. Because if you look at any ecosystem, it is functioning as a response to climate parameters, especially rainfall and temperature. Any ecosystem, starting from a small pond all the way to big rich rainforest or the desert ecosystem, they are functioning based on the two functions determines the ecosystem. That is, one is rainfall and another is temperature. These two parameters are changing. So the ecosystem is also getting a lot of pressure. That is what I think regarding the ocean ecosystem. And Madam has already discussed about it. But and due to that, there are many things are happening in biodiversity level where species are either getting migrated or getting extinct due to all this climate changes. So these are some of the that basically affect our warming of the sea the food security. And so, in a nutshell, if you look at the socio-economic impact of climate change, there are multi-dimensional, like the cost of adapting to this cost of issues is getting increased, and then the loss of work due to these stress, because any stress event is projected that his stress work-related loss will be like millions of working days per year, maybe in the near future. So, and another thing is that more gain to access to limited resources. Most of the war is because of the new way to find out resources. It is not for the one reason behind most of the wars is getting more resources and looking for more resources. So these are some of the, if you look at the urban areas, our urban cities, because the last Monday was the World Habitat Day. This year's World Habitat Day theme was urban crisis and response, where you have to integrate equity-based response has to be integrated, because most of the climate change issues has to deal with a lot of equity in terms of because the worst impact of climate change is being affected the most vulnerable people, like the marginalized and the less privileged people. So that we have to understand and we have to address that problem. So this is why if you look at the urban issues itself, we can see that a lot of urban threats are happening around the world, because most of our urban cities are designed for very low rainfall, like rainfall intensity duration curve. If you look at it is designed for very low intensity rainfall. But nowadays, Middle East, UAE countries, they are also getting a lot of flooding. So they are going to implement new plan for their urban cities, and then the urban heat island effect, because along with heat waves, the urban heat island effect also putting a lot of pressure in the urban ecosystem, and then water and erosion cyclones, so extreme sea level rise. So these are some of the other issues related to urban area, loss of natural habitats, and then the agricultural land. Most of the urbanization, the urban agglomeration is happening by encroaching towards the agricultural land. That is also putting a lot of pressure in the ecosystem, and also fragmentation to land extent, then environmental degradation. And and if you look at the global scenario, the global warming is a kind of byproduct of post-driven industrial revolution and capitalistic development. It's a byproduct of post-driven capitalist development. In that, the US alone contributed more than 40% of the cumulative carbon to the atmosphere. So that is a global scenario. And if you look at the global scenario of the most of the per capita emission, you can find that US comes around per capita emission in US is around 18 tons per person per year, and then India comes around only global average is around 4.4 tons per year, but India something around 2.53. So that we have went below the global average. So if you look at most of the African, Asian, Middle East and South Asian countries also lying in the very low line. So if you look at the rest of the disasters, there comes the inequality rise. Where if you rank most of the disasters in terms of death, we can find that most of if you rank 10 of the most disasters in terms of death, we can find that it all comes from underdeveloped countries, so developing worlds like Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Sudan, and droughts, disasters like droughts, storms, floods. These are some of the all are coming from less privileged countries. So it's most around 3 lakhs to 1.5 lakhs of people die in single disaster. So and when we count this in the other way, like economic loss, we can find that US comes in the first 6 position where starting from 2005, Katrina, Wilma, Rita, Maria, all these hurricanes all together put their US economy in a big hurry. Like like billions of US dollar loss happened in just 3 4 disasters. So this is what the inequality lies, and that is why if you largely speaking about the climate injustice, because climate crisis, because climate change is not putting any crisis to the social system. We can say that climate change in terms of extreme weather events, they are nothing but flood, drought, sea levels, all these climate crises exist, but there are social inequality lies in our social economic spectrum where the disadvantaged groups, for example, disabled people, low income people and countries, children, gender inequality, and elderly. They are the disadvantaged groups and classes. They are more susceptible to this type of climate-related risk. So then disadvantaged face rises because nowadays the hazard, the due to climate change, extreme events are getting more widespread. Not only intense, it is getting more widespread. So that the total exposure of this hazard is being increased over the years. That is why more and more people, more and more places are getting exposed to this type of climate events. That is why we can say that more people are disadvantaged, more places are getting prone to this type of disasters. And then policy delivery areas where we know that starting from the global to local scenario, there is no way to way in which we can distribute the wealth on an equity basis. So that is what another issue. So these are some of the issues already existing in our social system as a social inequality. When this climate crisis merged with social injustice, already existing social inequality, we can say it as a climate injustice because climate change alone cannot put any crisis to the system. It will aggravate the already existing social inequality or social injustice. And if you look at the total risk from the climate change, we can, there is a famous, this equation is very famous and it is well related equation as well. The risk is a function of hazard or vulnerability exposure and inversely proportional to the capacity, working capacity of the community. And with the climate change, we can say that not only the hazard is increasing, all the other part of the hazard risk in terms of hazard exposure and vulnerability is also getting increased. So that means with climate change, we are getting more hazard both in frequency, spatial extent, and also in the intensity. This is about the hazard itself, and that due to that, more people and asset is getting exposed. That is why if you look at this last report, the conference of parties, the main decision was on loss and damage fund, where the developed countries already realized that they have the main culprits in putting this whole carbon emission to the atmosphere for their economic development due to that. The low income countries are suffering. So because this is a kind of acceptance for that, and they decided to collect like a kind of 500 billion to 100 billion US dollar every year to give to the developing nations to offer because for their kind of resilience for the adaptation mitigation activities. So this is one thing, and in that the most of the loss and damage fund is going towards developing early warning systems, where in the 2015 only 50% of the countries were having the access to better early warning system. But now, if you look at more than 120 countries are having that capability for the access to better early warning system. So it is mainly because of the global support. So, and because we have to cope up with this, that we have to make better early warning system. That is the technology we have to adopt. And if you look at the total spectrum, how the risk drivers are related to climate change, as already I mentioned about climate change, pressure to the land use and urbanization also equally put exposure to the hazard. And at the same time, environmental degradation also creates a lot of vulnerability. So this all together is causing the problem. It's not the climate change alone, because other aspects like land use changes, urbanization, environmental degradation, all this together is lacking, and that is making most of the risk more. So this is about the exposure. Already I mentioned about that. And another thing is thing regarding the exposure is that asset concentration because people are largely migrating towards the urban cities and urban cities are expanding to a large extent. So that the population growth is one of the main drivers, which is driving people, forcing people to move towards other urban areas, and then for their economic and other activities, and then another thing is that exposure changes over time and place, so that is also important. And the actually large volume of people asset is being concentrated in particular, that is concentrated in particular area where which is more prone to more assets. So that is why asset in terms of value is very increased. And in order to avoid that, what we can do is that we have to use better station and use planning and structural and non-structural measures like nature-based solution or we use hard infrastructure. All this can be done. And the drivers of vulnerability when it comes to vulnerability aspect of which is basically it is driven by the physical and social. The physical is nothing but your design unregulated land use management. And when it comes to social, it is purely inequality, marginalization, social exclusion, discrimination by gender, social status. All this comes as to aggravate the vulnerability and then the economic aspects of this and then environmental aspect of this vulnerability. So now in each one we have to the purely managed development that is the main focus. And how we can reduce vulnerabilities, there is no single solution, but there are many ways where you can reduce the vulnerability to large extent by acting upon the building codes, insurance and social protection schemes, emphasizing economic diversity and receiving livelihoods because most of the vulnerable people they are depending on single income, single livelihood. Because they have multiple livelihood options, like for example fishing community or farming community. In the time of extreme weather events, they have alternate income from other livelihood. That will be another way of coping up with the reducing the vulnerability in terms of their economic loss or social. So then the knowledge and awareness creation, preparedness and measures. So these are some of the things we can. So now if you come to the disaster point of view, we can say that this is one of the way by which Kerala is witnessing for the last few years. If you look at the accumulation of rainfall, we can see that in a single day during May we receive in Cochin city we receive around 20 centimeters of rain in a single day. So and 3 days together we got around 45 centimeters of rain. That 45 centimeters of rain is nothing is almost like a monsoonal type of rain which we are expecting for June month alone. So that means that even from the pre-monsoon time itself, our cities are getting flooded. So and that introduces a lot of issues. Why this is happening? We have some studies on that. Because if you look at most of these clouds are forming in southeast Arabian Sea, the blue color represents very deep type of clouds. This is satellite data. So when these clouds approach the land, that is the main reason why this rainfall is getting more concentrated in our short period. And due to that, if you look at the Southeast Arabian Sea, earlier clouds are very shallow, like they are not extending up to only up to 5 to 6 kilometers during monsoon season. Now they are extending up to 14 to 15 kilometers in height. That is the lot of other issues. Not only it is not limited to rainfall alone. Nowadays, if you look at Kerala, as this monsoon year, we have this lot of wind gust events. Like that will to almost crores of rupees damage to the KSE and also the agriculture sector. So along with that, this heavy rain, there is a problem of wind gust and also lightning hazard is also will be increased. So these are some of the and cyclonic storms. If you look at the cyclonic storms, earlier 2 decades, 80 to 2000, there were a few number of cyclones in the islands. Now in the recent 2 decades, we can see the distribution of cyclones in the Arabian Sea has that of and it's not only the number, the intensity of this cyclone is also increasing. So this is also putting a lot of pressure. This is a cyclone which came closer to Kerala coast, that is okay cyclone, that almost 400 plus your fisherman lives at the sea. So that is also one of the segment. If you look at the distribution, this is what I already mentioned. That our region, the Kottayam region, is more susceptible to the lightning activities. This is one of the reasons that one is going to population. So there are different from this level of deepening of the ground system. So and also there are multiple and common others. This is another case of Hawkeye cyclone. This was not even mostly in the Kerala coast, but it formed close to actually like moved up all the way up to Gujarat. But that time, this is the scene from the Chellam Python area where coastal communities are facing a lot of issues due to our migration to their homes and land. So in another place called in Ernakulam district, there is another there's a place. They are primarily under the control of this tidal flooding. So in the presence of sea level rise, these storms are along with tidal flooding that has started that creating lot of pressure in their social system, especially most vulnerable, generalized vulnerable categories. And this urban retail and effect is increasing. So this is what this is a projection of the number of heat wave days exposed. The million heat wave days exposed for the projection. Maybe the low income countries will are more exposed in the future. So that is also a kind of inequality. And the air pollution is also increasing. This is another air pollution event which are happening in Brahmapuram. So where pollution started from here, and due to wind, it dispersed all the way in the Arabian Sea. And the other event, the wind was in the east, and it distributed on the opposite side. So these are some of the issues which we are facing in the urban cities of Kerala. So it's the urban cities and not only urban cities. Kerala as a whole is becoming a kind of multi-hazard weather-prone area where we have to adapt to this situation. Only way to adapt is globally is climate action, which is the global thing which connects all the SDG goals. But in terms of what is the main objective of climate action is ultimately the emission reduction, that is for the longer period, and the adaptation, that is for short term. For example, early warning system development is a kind of adaptation, and then the community engagement. That is more important because if you want to tackle this issue, you have to make sure that the communities are getting involved in this policy making and government system. Otherwise, if there is no voice of the people, they cannot. We cannot make a solution for them because, as Sir was telling, the government is global, but the reality it is happening in local. So you have to act locally. So where how you can act locally is by bringing the local community into the decision making process. So that is what the private action, the local planning is very much important, decentralization is very much important. So that is where we have synergy between both mitigation and adaptation. On the mitigation side, mostly on the clean energy, low emission technologies, carbon capture technologies, but on the adaptation side, it is mostly on the emergency disaster preparedness and the land use planning. So this together has to be in synergies with a number of activities. But if you look at if we invest 1.6 trillion dollar for every one system, we in that we get almost 6.4 trillion. We can avoid 6.4 trillion value in terms of disasters. So that's why if you look at the global income of the disaster, you can see that the disasters are increasing, but the death rate is decreasing because of the well integrated water system, where we can say this is the last slide where if you want to make a functioning heavy water system, you have to make sure that it should be people centric, where there are four parts of it. It is a well-known diagram where the risk knowledge is the first leg of any kind of people centric heavy water system, where people have to have the knowledge of what are the risks they are going to face in the future, where education awareness of this program comes. When other leg is monitoring and warning. It's like a four leg of a chair where all this if four legs are strong, only the chair will stand. Otherwise, if you want any one of these legs, if is weak, you will collapse. That is why the monitoring warning, that is also we have to make sure that better early warning systems are accessible to this low income countries and less privileged people. And then the dissemination and communication, the media and communication channels should be very accurate. They should not create any kind of bogus or any kind of anxiety to people. And then the response capability that has to be there. Most of the government mechanism has to play a bigger role. So this is where the people-centric early warning system and action is very important in terms of private action in all aspects. And I was told, this is the last slide. For climate resilience, there is no single capsule or single solution. There is multiple ways by which we have to address. It is basically the convergence of different aspects, including the governance, innovative ideas, risk reduction technologies, and operational sustainability, including policy governance, inclusivity, and speaking towards equity, nature-based solution and innovation, both together it converge. Then only we can make a more climate equity where all will have the access to most of the data and the resources. So this is a way by which we have to address the climate change issue in a more equity way. This is where I stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abhilash, for that presentation. Any questions, please? Sir? Recently, in the ocean side, El Nino effect makes significant ocean currents and, of course, a recent climate change in Kerala. Can you comment on this? El Nino.
Yeah, I know, but El Nino is a global climate pattern. It is happening in the Pacific, but it has got connection to not only to Kerala, all the global climate is being modulated with El Nino. Similarly, Kerala is also affected. Like if you example 2015, the largest coral bleaching happened. Not only in Kerala side, the Australian side also happened in 2015. That was the biggest